Right, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Sprent, and I'm going to talk about the title of Global Towers, but actually I call it more about operating centers, and it's about organizing for excellence. And actually I'm going to talk a bit about my experience I've had within Unilever, who I worked for 35 years and just finished last year, about how we started to build these operational centers. I don't think the presentation is going to take more than probably about half an hour. So if you want to interrupt or ask questions as we're going through, we've got time for that. So do please just interrupt. I realize we're getting to the end of the day, so I'll try and make it fairly practical, and we can make it, if you have any questions, we can make it fairly discussive. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background, although I think today we've covered a lot of the reasons why we're doing this. I'll talk a bit about the design of the operational centers, then I want to talk about a case study, as I say, we did in Unilever about the order-to-cash process. Some learnings, and then I've got a few questions that if we have time we can talk about at the end. Within Unilever, I did many jobs through manufacturing and then supply chain, and then as a sort of a guy in charge of supply chain, like many of you are. And the question I got most asked was, can we get better service with less cost? It was the question every business chairman, managing director, CEO would ask me. Come on, you've got to be able to do this. If it wasn't that, it's how can we, actually launch products quicker at lower cost? But everything was one or the other, and can we do it? So, this is, I think, one of the critical questions that we ask ourselves in supply chain. How can we do both at the same time and not focus on one at some point and then flip to the other? And this is what I think it's one of the key. I think operational centers is one of the key areas which can facilitate asking this question. And we get asked this question at a time when we've got huge product proliferation going on. We've got more customers coming online, demanding more bespoke packs, more special packs. The complexity is going up. And at the same time, we've now got this online shopping, competition coming in, and different channels, multi-channels of distributing our products. So the question was a fairly simple one, can we do service and cost, but they're making it a lot more difficult by having these additional challenges. And this was a thing that for Unilever we were struggling with, being able to both deliver both the better service, which our customers were requiring, but also reducing our cost. So we talked about, and it's been around for a long time, and I think we heard it this morning from some of the presentations about global towers. And we had, in Unilever, been talking about it for many years, but not really grasped the nettle. And we actually then decided to really take this on and see that we felt this is one way that we could actually tackle both those key objectives. There's a lot of discussion about that, so I just want to give a sort of bit of a definition of what an operational center is. It tends to be a place where you bring together various processes involved in the supply chain. So that you can actually integrate some of those processes. Order management is a good example of that, where you're bringing together the customer service function, the planning, and the logistics functions together to make sure you've got a good integrated process. It's usually involved around, and certainly for Unilever, it was about a global location strategy, saying, okay, if we're going to aggregate across countries some of these processes, what is a way to do it? And trying to do it in an agnostic way, rather than a way that the biggest country gets the operation center and everybody else has to feed into that. It was really about looking at your whole network of countries and saying, where do we want to co-locate these processes? How many of these centers do we need? Is it 1 or is it 10? And really deciding where you're going to have those. The third one is about, and this is, I think, traditionally where people have looked at operation centers, was about other activities that actually are non-added, but we at Unilever cannot add value to. And actually, if we could outsource it to some other company who can then build scale, they can then actually provide a service to Unilever on some of these activities, which are currently sort of bundled up already inside the company. And finally, it allowed, certainly in Unilever, us to start looking at a global IT solutions. Before, in many of our processes, we'd either had country or regional solutions to our IT. And by starting to look more at globally these processes and joining some of these processes together, and certainly looking at the global way in terms of location, our IT function was able to say, right, this is how we can have a roadmap to try and therefore converge onto an IT platform. So that's sort of some of the elements of it. Operation centers don't just sort of come around, and we certainly for Unilever, we felt there's a sort of progression from where you can start and therefore where you end up. And you can see here, it tends to start at the transactional end of joining processes together to look at those activities which are being transactional. You tend to then, it tends to drive efficiency and therefore cost savings. But as you start to integrate those processes and getting into the next stage is when you start to say, right, where can those processes really add value in terms of service, by joining things together. You're then creating a center of excellence, which is providing you with a lot of information around key processes with a similar IT platform, and you can start therefore collecting more data. And then we've heard a lot today about collecting data, dashboards, analysis, and I don't think until we get to, for us, it's not until we get to this sort of stage where we can really start adding value back into the supply chain. And then you've got to then, really at the end of the day, you then start to get a really well-tuned operation at a regional or global level, which can then really work with the business and get much better value into the business from the supply chain. So that's sort of the steps that we've took. Where Unilever was about, we started down here probably in Europe about 10 years ago, starting to move some logistics operation to Poland. Europe kept moving forward, moving some financial operations. I'll talk about it in a minute, but we started moving our order to cash processes about 3 years ago. We've now moved some planning. Some planning's gone global, but some of that's also gone regional. And then we're adding some of our co-packing operations there as well. So we're starting to build function by function, process by process into these operations center, making sure that each one is operational, and then building them together. So we're sort of at that phase now. We're starting to we're struggling a bit with all the information that we're getting, but we're starting to create now dashboards and really starting to see the benefits of the information we're collecting. A point I wanted to make in the design of the operational centers is around looking at the activities. I think what we saw, certainly in the UK, as we know, 10, 15 years ago, when people started to say, oh, well, we need to put everything in India, we need to outsource everything, we need to put stuff offshore. And they tended to put all the activities offshore. You lost all your, for instance, your customer service capability onshore. And to be honest, it was a total disaster as a customer. We went through a very vigorous process on every process that we looked at. And basically, we have I think this is one of our critical design features. We talk about having 3 tiers. You may have seen this before, but the first one is about what are the activities which have to stay in the country, in the market itself, which must stay there. And you'll see an example in a minute of what those were for customer service. You've then got a tier 2, which are operations or activities which don't have to be at market facing, but Unilever is adding value to them. It's about having knowledge. It's about having company-specific information to make decisions that you can go forward. It would also, and by bringing those together, you're driving efficiency. And those are what we call tier 2 operations, and those usually are done by Unilever people, but they're done at an operations center. And the third operations, which their activities are then tend to be the ones which can become rule-based, which can become automated, which are transactional, but actually Unilever doesn't add a lot of value to, and actually other third parties may be doing this and can build scale in a different way. And you have to go into quite a lot of detail of every process that you have to look at those and then classify them in those 3 boxes to be able to then start to design your operational center. So here's an example of that in logistics. You can see clearly at tier 1 within country. So for instance, within the UK, you've still got to keep your warehouse execution. You're keeping your factory logistics operation. And if you're setting trade terms, clearly that's done usually locally with your sales, customer development department, so you want to keep that there. But you can actually then move quite a lot of, and we've probably moved 60% of our activities to a regional level, and you can see those type of activities which will then go into an operational center hub, which you may have one or a number of those. And then you can say at the level 3, which is just more transactional, reporting, the track and trace capability, doesn't need to be done by that. It actually can be done by a third party, and you buy that service in. Does that make sense? Nodding, yeah. Who else here? I'm just going to have a quick time out. Here, operational centers, global towers. Anybody else had a go at it? Does this similar process or?
Yeah, it's Pfizer, a pharmaceutical company.
Okay.
So which box we have in which tier might be slightly different.
Yep. And I think that's a good point, because I don't think every design is going to be bespoke to that company, and that's where you have to go through that process. There's no template just to say those activities are all going to be there. Yeah.
We're not there yet, but we're considering it.
Right.
It's really useful. We're looking at a large-scale ERP replacement.
Yes.
That is about what do you centralise and what do you not centralise across our code. So this is really
Okay. Yeah.
Where do you have your order management?
So good question. Excellent question. We're going to talk about order to cash. So this is we'll talk about. So just to make sure that, this is how we define order to cash. I know there can be different ways, but we look at it from the order management all the way to cash collection. For Unilever, it's about it announced its results today, so it's 53 billion turnover. You can see we're in, 170 countries. You can see about 3,000 or 4,000 people involved in this process around the world, about 1 billion sales orders. You can see 1.5 million. So it's a fairly complex business, multi-country, multi-language, and if you look at the left-hand side, multi-organizational, because this presentation is going to focus a little bit more on the organizational side. I think we've heard a lot today about the IT systems that we can have. But my view is, I suppose, coming from a real practical supply chain point of view, is you've got to get the people, the organization, and the process right. It's great to do the IT at the same time. If you've got a big ERP up, absolutely do it at the same time. But if you don't get this right, ERP will fail. It's pretty clear. So you can see on the left-hand side here, and this is just actually was in Europe, we had different responsibilities across the order-to-cash process by different functions. So supply chain was responsible for quite a lot of it, but we had third parties, we had CD as customer development, our sales side, we had customer finance, and we also had finance itself. So it was all over the place, and we were doing it in different ways. We had different systems. Okay, we've got different customers, so you may argue, yeah, okay, it's got to be different at the front end. But in the end, actually, the board of Unilever said, that's enough. We want to have one process, one way of working, and actually we're going to give it to supply chain to manage, and they're going to have to decide how to sort it out. And the usual request from the business, we want better customer service, and we want cost savings, and of course we want some extra cash coming out of the whole thing as well. So as you can see, so that 20% more efficient translated to about 500 to 600 people leaving the business because of the project. So this was kicked off about 3 years ago. I was a project leader. It was a global project. We had started in Europe, and when we were asked to, we rolled it out globally. And this really was the solution that we implemented. It took us about 18 months to come up with the solution. What does this look like? The first part, the top part is about the model itself. So that's about the process. It's about going down to each step in with each of those processes within order to cash and saying, okay, what operations have to stay local? What operations do we want to add value to and put in one of our regional operation centers? And what can then the rest can we put to third party? And you can see the red is the stuff that went to third party. and that's more about claims and such like. The green is what has to stay close to the customer, so you can see the front end of the order management process. And then the blue is the stuff which went to our operations center. So that was designed at the same time. We said, right, so what teams do we need to set up? We need to set 3 teams up. Up till then, nearly all the teams were locally based in country. Okay, so they would, and the people within the country would be doing a mixture of jobs. It could be a mixture of all of those. So in the UK, our customer service department would be doing both order fulfillment as well as claims, returns, and trying to do a bit of everything, as well as customer collaboration and some customer forecasting. In others, people had split the roles. In France, they had peak planners who were actually doing, obviously, VMI work as well. So we went to here. We said, right, we're going to still keep people in the center, customer-facing. We're going to have some process specialists to really understand the process and drive that. Then we'll have some transactional team. It'll be underpinned by a CRM tool, which we didn't have. And then we looked at the system architecture. We are SAP-based, so a lot of it was around SAP. But actually, a lot of bits were then, we then started looking and being a bit more flexible and seeing what other applications could we add on to the front end, back end, to obviously pulling in the orders and analyzing the orders, which would help us make that process more efficient. And obviously doing this as we do the whole global project. So just going on to then the organizational design side. So as we talked about, this is the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, so it brings you, hopefully, the real practical side of this. So we said all customers will only talk to people within their own country. So in terms of language, in terms of culture, in terms of ways of working, if Tesco phone up, they will talk to somebody in the UK about any issue that they have. We're not moving that offshore. They will do all the customer-facing role, or do all the communication. They'll be responsible for the order to follow through, and obviously they'll work with CD about prioritization of orders or any other issues that need to be discussed with the sales department. We then said, right, for certain activities which need excellence, they will then sit in our operational center, and that's about order entry, order validation, claims, and the analysis of the claims, both on pricing and logistics. But the actual collection of registering the claims, just getting it into some sort of ledger, looking at the cash application and the credit analysis would sit with the process specialist, which is in the transactional side. And then clearly all of that had to have some common way of communicating. So around a customer, people knew exactly what was going on. If an order hadn't been processed properly in an ops center, the customer-facing person can see exactly what's going on, and the claims management side, so you can see across that. And we didn't have a CRM tool, so we implemented that at the same time. We've ended up with, is that 10, 2, 4, 6, 9 operational centers. About 3 in each major time zone. So North America and 2 in South America, then 3 sort of in middle world, which is Poland, Turkey, and South Africa, you can see, and then 3 on the east side. Is this the optimal level? I don't think so. I think we came with a slightly, and we can have a discussion about it a little bit. I mean, some of you maybe are not operating global companies, so it's not so useful. But I think as a critical mass, just to give you an idea, we believe the operational centers need to be around, probably for us, about 200 people. Much small, and that can be across different processes. So you could have 50 from customer service, maybe 50 from planning. But if you get much smaller than that, you're not getting a lot of savings. There's a structure to set up, there's a building to set up, there's management to set up, there's systems to set up, and therefore you're not going to get a lot of savings. The more you can obviously aggregate together, and where these are all about process excellence, and you can really drive scale in these operations, then you start to get good savings. But in the end, this was our sort of first attempt at going from about 170 customer service departments down to 9. So we felt we got somewhere, and there was a lot of differences of ways of working in individual countries. So to try and shove that all into one place or 3 places, which is one of our original plans, it wasn't feasible at the time. We've got a mixture here of Unilever owned, and in fact, which most of them are, and Unilever run. We did actually go to the Philippines, though, and went with outsourcing the whole operation under a Unilever manager. So they're using a third-party people in the Philippines. As probably a lot of you know, the Philippines is a great place now for outsourcing. They've got a very educated workforce, people who, I think with a very strong culture of customer service. And it was felt that rather than setting up a Unilever operation, we used one of the BPOs out there to set that up for us. I'm going to stop again. Any questions of this? Does it make sense? Does it, you're not quite as global, or Pfizer? No, you're Pfizer. I mean, probably. Are you looking at similar footprint, or?
Actually, but we actually have far less hubs. We have 4.
Yeah. And where would they be?
So Costa Rica for the Americas.
Right.
Bucharest for Europe.
Right.
Casablanca for
Africa, yeah.
And then Singapore for the
Right. Yeah, so you've got. I think I don't think there's no ready template. You have got to be very careful about in terms of time zone. I mean, language. In Europe, we did. In Poland, we put people in there who can speak French, who can speak Dutch is not so bad. I come with Spanish, I think, so making sure. There are some in South America, it's always complicated. Well, it's always. They have tax. You can get great tax benefits if you keep. I don't think we would have one in Brazil, even though it's our biggest business. But for tax reasons, by having it there, it's it pays for itself, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the learnings. So for me, having gone through that project and trying to drive a common process, a common way of working, a common IT system across sort of 170 countries, 9 operation centers. One of the things which really helped me was making sure that we've really defined the end-to-end process. You're not cherry-picking, taking part of that process, just the order management part, or just supply planning, for instance. It's by taking the full process, pulling it out of a country, redesigning it totally, and then working out what needs to be there and what can be done not in country. I mean, I've talked about this quite a lot. Linking the process, the organization, the IT, for me, was critical. It was a real enabler for the smooth implementation. It took longer. The design probably took, I think I quoted about 1.5 years. But I mean, it takes that long because you have to go, you start with probably the process, the activities, but you have to then iterate around a number of times to get there. Yeah.
Quick question. On that point,
Yeah.
to what degree were customers
Involved.
or aware?
So, I mean, in the UK, let me give the example. We informed. I mean, you need to be with big customers. You need to inform them, but we guaranteed there would be no impact on them at all. In fact, we said we hope to give you a better service. Unfortunately, just as we had this, we had a number of supply issues, which was nothing to do with this, of course, and so it almost hid the implementation. So we didn't involve them. We did actually say, let us get on with it. We're doing it, but you will notice a better service. We actually reorganized the whole customer service because we were very much a customer-focused customer service team. But then when we went to this, we reorganized into much more category focus. so that we could actually look across, for instance, foods or personal care, and give a much better actually idea about, when availability would come up. It allowed us to give actually a much better information to customers about when they're going to get products. One of the things is, I mean, this is, of course, obvious, but thinking that you can eliminate the exceptions, stick all these different processes, stick them all in one place, and hope for them to sort out the problems and deal with countries and tell them, well, this is a standard way of doing things, is unfair. Also, you've probably cut 10 or 20% of the people out as well. So one of the things you've really got to do is when you do this gap analysis between what countries are doing and what is the standard process, you've really got to redesign the country and get the country to work in a new way before you change their way of working. And that may sound totally obvious, but, it's quite easy in the project to go, oh, God, I've had that conversation with France 10 times. They're not going to change. Let's get the people out. We'll change it once we've got the people in Poland. We'll sort it out. We'll tell them what we're doing, and that's the way to do it. But, you really start, there you put in a huge amount of pressure and stress on the new group you've just set up in Poland, to be honest. So it's just not worth it. It is worth fighting and getting things done before you start to move. And what was interesting for me was we spent a lot of time, a lot of focus on these new operation centers. We talked about order to cash, setting up operation centers. This is what it's all about. And it was about getting the right people. Everybody was so worried about we would get the right people with customer service skills and the right language skills and the right culture and all that type of stuff. But actually, that wasn't too bad. When we went back to the countries, the people in the countries, we said, right, your role now is not one of these sort of customer service representatives who can do lots of little things. Your key role now is to be the interface to the customer. We suddenly realized that some of those people we had in there were very good transactional people. They'd process orders very efficiently. They'd followed up claims. But actually, we're asking now for them to do collaboration, talk about collaboration projects of how we can improve things. They weren't capable of doing that. We hadn't really looked at that side and really analyzed who we should be keeping, who actually the people there who should be leaving, and what skills. And they needed to, almost 90% of them had to be retrained, which we came to late on in the... So even though you're setting up a new operation somewhere, and that's where your focus is, and you're taking stuff away from the old operation, just think about how you're remodeling the old operation to taking it in. So it would be the same. I mean, a lot of these, I think, would be the same in planning, where if you're taking some part of the planning operation out, those, a lot of our planners are great on setting up spreadsheets and doing stuff and really love fiddling with the numbers. You suddenly say, actually, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Your job now is to really work with the business on what the best forecast is. They'll suddenly get a bit scared and go, oh my God, I haven't got those, I don't want to have to talk to that salesman again, he shouts at me a lot. So, I mean, it's a sort of, it's a practical point. I'm sort of overemphasizing it because I want, what I was hoping from this presentation was to talk more about the people and the organization rather than the sort of the IT side. So we've talked about some of these questions already. The first one, which sort of kept on going round, certainly in Unilever, there was a lot of pressure from the centre, the board, to get as many savings as you can. So obviously one of the biggest ways I can get savings is to have less operation centres, be able to create more scale. But alternatively, I felt that there could be a loss of customer service. So how many you have, we've discussed it. It can be 4, it could be 10, it could be 1, depending on what that particular operation is. But really, you've got to think that one through. In-house or outsourced. My view is, it depends. If you've got a really good third party who knows this, who's worked very closely with Unilever, and you have a culture of that, certainly in Southeast Asia and Asia, where people are more used to outsourcing, but having people in-house doing that work, then I think you could go either. You can have a transition also, of course, but that makes it harder. We spent a lot of time talking about, in the operations center, you're trying to drive process excellence. You're trying to drive people who really understand the process, driving scale and efficiency. Having said that, you want your country to be able to interface into that organization easily. So if they have a problem at a customer level, they need to be able to talk to somebody. So we spent quite a lot of time discussing whether the team should be process-driven or should be country-driven. Whether that sort of a team leader should be order-to-cash supervisor or a UK supervisor. And clearly, if you've got bigger scale, you can have both, or you can double hat people and such like. I think it depends, again. I mean, we went eventually with country teams, so we lost some of the scale that we could get out of driving a full end-to-end process, but it allowed us to making sure that we didn't lose that linkage with the country. And when you talk to our boards at country level, that was the most the thing that they were worried most about is you're taking these operations away from us that we've always managed. How are we going to know that you're not going to stop answering a phone when you hand over, and we have customer service problems and there's nobody there to fix them. So we made sure we were customer focused. We have more of a plan as we get more confidence, as we're working, we can start to merge it more into more process function delivery and deliver more savings. And there was a little bit about, you saw this sort of network of op centers. It depending, again, how you're set up organizationally, globally. But, do you really want those 7 or 9 or 4 operational centers to work in the same way? Have the same processes, have the same ways of working, to drive, to keep that sort of common process that you'd organize. Unfortunately, those centers tend to sit within sometimes a regional organization, and the regional organization tends to want to manage whatever's in that region. So our Polish operation sits within the European organization. They will then have, of course, their own opinion of how that operational center will run. Unfortunately. And you then have this conflict. And it's, again, one thing that you have to go through about, should it be run, do you want it regionally? You lose some of that control. You have then more of a community of practice of operational centers. Or can you try and keep it global and make sure that you really drive that process and keep coming, you've then got the IT aligned, you've got your processes aligned. Again, it depends a little bit on the culture of your company.
On that country integration, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that if you're a country, the third point down?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Are you contacting the operations centre, you're dealing with a sort of key account manager for your country,
Yeah.
with everything behind the scenes is process driven, or is there an entire process for that country, another process for another?
Yeah, so I think depending on the scale of a country, so if you're a UK, which is our sort of the biggest operation in Europe for Unilever, we could almost have a dedicated team who supporting the UK. But when you get to the smaller countries, Belgium, I've got to be careful, I don't want to upset anybody here, some of the smaller European countries, they couldn't afford to have a full-time person. Then you've got half a person, so they're not going to have there will be a team who is looking after maybe Portugal, Spain, and Italy, for instance, and therefore, but the Italians still want to have a single point of contact who can talk Italian and such like. So I mean, for us, the answer was we need to go country, because there was very much sort of making sure we don't lose contact with the country. But you are then sort of trading off a little bit of your savings or your process excellence, I would say, because of that. You may have to add another person on or something like that. So it's not, I don't want to make these black and white, but it's sort of stuff that you might want to think about. Yeah.
So what is the benefit for a big country? Is it basically that you're going to east?
Yeah.
Labour cost is cheaper, or is that basically?
That's a good cut. I mean, to be honest, the business case for this, for some countries was negative, as always when these things happen. So but for the UK, we took out, it's about the country really focusing on the customers and not worrying about all this other stuff that they shouldn't be worrying about, having meetings about what's the IT solutions, what's the CRM tool, what's the order management system, how do you link with logistics. So the real benefit for big countries is less about savings, it's more about giving them ability to focus on what they really want to do. And we said to the countries, you're all about customer facing. It's all about getting your customer service people out there collaborating. And certainly our sales department thought this was brilliant because it allowed, they then saw dedicated supply chain people working on customer collaboration projects and not being drawn into very operational, transactional stuff in the background. For smaller countries, you did get a saving. The other thing that actually, there was also, there's the back end of it, of actually claims and claims management, took up a huge amount of time within a local country, and this took all of this out. And some had outsourced to IBM and other big, and it had been a disaster. So it was a lot about, for the big countries, about simplification and not worrying about that. So, yeah, no, I'll stop there. Does that help? Yeah. Any other questions you want to ask about? Yeah, yeah.
I saw in your first chart.
Yeah.
You had the plan source, all those.
Yeah.
You did the case study on the order
cash. Yeah.
You do the same for.
So we did exactly. In fact, the first really function we did it was on logistics. So we moved a lot of those logistics operations you saw to regional centres and regional hubs, transport planning, contracts, all of that stuff. We did exactly the detailed work. We've done partly the same on planning. And interesting, on planning, we broke it down into planning. There was a center. We set up one global center of excellence in India, and we still have some regional operations centers. So we're still. I've been away. I left. You don't know what's going on from that, the Anaplan side. So I know Anaplan was part of that, helping design that, but you probably. Bangalore, yeah. So partly, some of it was done in a centre. Planning is a difficult one. And you may find this, well, you may not, it's strange, but there was a big argument about planning. And when you talk about supply planning and demand, well, certainly supply planning, where's the best place to do it? When you go back to my basic tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, is supply planning, do you have to do it in the country or not? Or can you do it at a regional centre? Do you really need to have local knowledge of what because some people argue you need to put supply planning near factories so you really understand what's going on there. Other people say if you sit too close to the factory, you're not really thinking unconstrained planning. You're too fixed by your factory thinking. And certainly when I left Unilever, that discussion still hadn't, there was different regions had different ideas. There was a difficult one. There was clearly some things like capacity planning, definitely strategic planning, looking at understanding demand forecasts, real analysis of stuff when so it can go to tier 3, and it's very much then reporting of stuff. Demand planning, most of it still sits in the country because of that really understanding the forecast and linkage then with marketing and the sales team. So I think planning was a hard one. A lot of, obviously some finance did, but finance tend to keep, I don't know if there's any finance people here. For them, it's much more simple. They go, well, we would do it ourselves, or we'll just outsource it to India. It's sort of a tier 1, a tier 3. And in supply chain, we were explaining to them that actually for us, there's a scalability, but it's not about outsourcing. It's about scalability with knowledge. Whereas you believe they can just sort of outsource and put it into, which actually, and I think they've regretted some of that. Some of that they realize that they've outsourced to staff to companies who don't know really the Unilever way of working, and it's been a disaster.
What do you do about procurement?
So yeah, procurement. That's a good point. We're doing exactly the same in procurement at the moment. They were also they were just going through the exercise of 1, 2, and 3, and a lot of it was in organizationally, procurement had already gone regional and global in terms of the decision making, the big decisions. But they still did a lot in-house. A lot of that was they were looking at outsourcing, contracts, volumes, linking with the numbers side to really get better forecasting. A lot of that was done on spreadsheets inside. So this sort of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, this sort of really looking at your activities at quite a low level has really driven out a lot of thinking about why are we doing this operation? Is it really good? Now, if you keep it at too high a level, that discussion, like, for instance, supply planning or demand planning, the answer tends to be quite simple or, oh, no, it's got to stay in the country. But if you go down a level and you split those into maybe 10 different sub-activities, then you say, actually, some of those operations don't have to be done here. They are adding, we're spending a lot of time printing reports or getting reports done. You know, if we could get somebody else to do that, that's great. So, and that's what, so, you know, for each of the supply chain functions, sub-functions, we're doing that work. And so we've actually got we have a projection, about 10,000 people in supply chain work in those functions in country. And we reckon probably about 50% of that work can be taken out of country and moved to an operations center, a tier 2 or tier 3, over the next 5 years. And then with that, you usually can aggregate a sort of a 20% reduction in manpower because of that. And you can then go to arbitrage, you can leverage some lower costs. It doesn't always, you know, it depends where you are. Southeast Asia, very difficult because, you know, Vietnam is cheaper than the Philippines. So you move your customer service from Vietnam to Philippines, your labor cost goes up, unfortunately. Yeah. 5 minutes.
Okay. One question.
Yeah.
Your portfolio, I guess you've got products you made in one location for multiple countries.
Yes.
How do you resolve issues between countries?
On allocation.
Allocation.
Oh, God. So I sat on the UK board of Unilever, and I think it was about probably 5 years ago, and we had suddenly in the UK we had a very sunny spell, you know, totally unusual in July. And we ran out of Cornettos and Magnums, and they're all being made in Italy. So I was phoning up my Italian board member, supply chain board member, they're saying, come on, give us some more. And we had visibility of their stock, and they said, no, we've got our forecast. You know, everything we've got is for our own forecast because it's all multilingual, so you could have it. And would refuse to give it to us. And literally, this goes up to, you know, the CEO of Unilever because people are arguing. There is an allocation. I mean, within stock in the UK. So if we've got it in the UK warehouse, then obviously the allocation is done in line with discussions with the sales department. At a regional level, it then goes to actually there is a regional arbiter, a European, you know, coordinator. But it's interesting a discussion because in some respects, I think in your forecasting and planning, you need to you should almost do this in an automated way. I think this is where AI or whatever it is should come into this because I don't think this is based on whoever shouts loudest. There has got to be a clear set of rules. Let's sit down, agree those rules. We know what people's forecast is. If you go over that forecast, you get this, and agree with, you know, beforehand. And then you just let the computer run. I mean, I love this idea I heard this morning about an autonomous supply chain. I mean, it's certainly in Unilever, our supply chain people probably spent half their time interfering with the normal process to fix it. And you just think, Christ, if only we could get those set points, that master data, that, you know, into a more autonomous state. You know, we could actually go off and play golf on a Friday like the salespeople do. And because they're usually working, they always people working last thing on a Friday night trying to solve a customer service problem. So, and I think, you know, with some of the stuff I heard today from different, I mean, I know a lot of it's wish list and not actually happened yet, but, you know, I think there is a, you know, I think, you know, this idea of having more autonomous supply chains, I think operations centers, I don't think you can get probably autonomous supply chains if you have 170 different countries all operating differently, or even in Europe, you know, 15 different countries doing different things, and therefore, and coming from one supply, but one manufacturing base. So somehow we need to really get to grips with this, and then we can go out and actually do more value-added stuff. Oh, I thought you were going to ask a question. No, she said time's up. Okay. All right, that's it. Thanks so much indeed for your time.